ayant sévi sur la toute première PlayStation il y a de ça plusieurs années, la série des Chevaliers de Baphomet, ou Broken Sword en VO, a réussi à séduire des millions de joueurs sur des plateformes, les consoles en l'occurrence, qui ne se prêtaient pas vraiment au genre point and click. Aujourd'hui, la série nous revient à travers ce 5e épisode, baptisé La Malédiction du Serpent, qui met une nouvelle fois sur le devant de la scène les personnages de George Stobart et Nicole Collard. Dans cette aventure, il sera question de meurtre, d'enquête et de ces évangiles gnostiques exclus du Nouveau Testament. Charles Cécile, le créateur de la série, nous parle d'ailleurs des éléments qui l'ont inspiré pour ce nouvel épisode.
I love the idea of the attack on Béziers and the fact that the crusade, the Albigensian crusade, was organised in the 13th century, and all of that was very exciting. And then independently of that, I read about the discovery in 1945 of an urn. A farmer, a shepherd in Egypt, discovered an urn, and he thought there might be treasure in it. He was digging for fertiliser, for soft soil to use as fertiliser. And he thought there might be treasure, and he was very disappointed because he broke it and it was full of manuscripts. And he took the manuscripts home, and the story goes, and this is a true story, but it said that his mother needed some fire, so she used some of the manuscripts for fire, and they used some for the animals, but there were still so many that they had plenty. And then a friend of his suggested they might have some value, so they took them to Cairo and sold them, and everybody was happy. But it turns out that these were actually the Gnostic Gospels. They were Gospels that were considered heretical in the 3rd and 4th century. And the decree went out they had to be destroyed. And so effective was their destruction that a lot of these things nobody even knew existed. They never knew they'd even been written. So there was the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Judas Iscariot, but from a totally different perspective. So it was quite clear that even in Jesus' time, there were two different factions, the Gnostics on one side and what was the Orthodox on the other. But the one that really captured my imagination was the testimony of truth, which tells the story of the Garden of Eden, but from the serpent's perspective. So the serpent is the good one. He brings knowledge to mankind and frees man from the jealous God that created him, which is like dynamite because it's so different to what we're taught. But all you need to scratch under the surface. The bringer of light in Latin is lux ferre, which is Lucifer. So even in this day and age, all of these connections are still resonating. In England, when we go to church, which I don't do very often, but when I go to church, you recite the Nicene Creed, and that says, "I believe in one God. I believe in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost." And what you realise is that even 2,000 years later, everybody is saying, I don't believe in Gnosticism. I don't believe all of this stuff. I only believe the Orthodox. So powerful was it. And I thought this was wonderful. You've got the Albigensian Crusade where the Gnostics were effectively destroyed, and the Dominicans were created at that time specifically to root out any of the last heretics. And you've got that, and then you've got going all the way back to biblical times, and why were the church so scared? Why were they so afraid? Why did they hate the Cathars, the Gnostics, so much? And I thought that there were some really nice, quite profound questions that hopefully I thought would work well in a new Broken Sword game.
Charles Cécile est manifestement un passionné d'histoire et possède également cet attachement particulier à la France qui lui a très clairement servi dans la conception de ses jeux.
Nico, of course, lives in Paris, and George loves Paris, so our games tend to start in Paris. And that's very much a reflection of the fact that I have very fond memories. Back in the early 70s, it might even be the late 60s. I was born in 1962. I used to come with my mother, and we'd stay in Paris, and it was just extraordinary because in those days, the food in England was terrible. Now, some French say that it's still terrible, but that's not true. Our food's actually now very good. But it was just terrible. And we had no restaurants. So to come to this city with the most extraordinary restaurants, and people smoked gitan and gauloise, smells that we never had in England, and the women looked so glamorous, and I mean, I get my revenge, of course, because the waiters, even the waiters in Paris, oozed sexuality. So we have right at the very beginning of this new Broken Sword, we have a waiter that is every bit of that. He's Serge Gainsbourg, down to the philosophical talk, the sexuality. So all of these are sort of rather strange figments of my memories from the very late 60s and early 70s. So it seems natural, and I love Paris, and I love speaking French, and I love the French culture. So it's been translated, and that gives me the great opportunity to come to Paris and do more research and talk to fine people like you.
À l'instar d'autres licences, la série des Chevaliers de Baphomet a revu le jour grâce à Kickstarter et aux milliers de backers enthousiastes qui ont soutenu le projet. L'occasion pour Charles de s'étendre sur sa propre expérience du crowdfunding et sur sa vision du marché d'une manière générale.
When we wrote the first Broken Sword game in 1996, adventures were very popular. And then they became less and less popular, but not because people didn't want to play them, but because publishers didn't want to commission them and retailers didn't want to stock them. And that was because PlayStation was so successful. And everybody thought that if PlayStation is successful, every game should be visceral, it should be 3D, it should be in this particular genre. So the games became more and more expensive and more focused. And that totally killed the indie scene. And adventure games are definitely a niche. They're a large niche, but they are a niche. They're off the mainstream. And so the common view from publishers and retailers was that the adventure was dead. And that was because there was, 200, 300, 400 slots at retail, and they were very much the obvious games. The really big change came, of course, when digital distribution became feasible, and particularly the iPhone. And now, of course, there are close to a million apps available. So that is perfect that's perfect. I think it's much better for the market, because you have the AAA games that cost $100 million, and they're great, and we love them, the Grand Theft Autos, the Call of Duties. But underneath that, you have a very thriving and healthy indie scene. And all the mid-tier games, the type of games that THQ used to publish, have gone away. Because actually people either want the top stuff or they want the indie stuff. And as an indie developer, which Revolution clearly is, we're in this great position that the hardcore gamers will play more casual games, and obviously our more casual audience will play our games, but the more casual audience won't play the AAA games. So we have a potentially massive market that's growing and growing. And through the iPhone in particular, we have reached many millions of people that have only started playing video games in the last few years, and some of them because of Broken Sword. So it's a totally different system. But when we started republishing Broken Sword on iPhone, and I'm very proud of the fact that it still has a Metacritic average score of 91%, much higher than Monkey Island, our big competitor. And the game was very successful. We came from a very weak financial position to actually being able to write a prototype for the game. And then we reached the point where we were going to run some money, and historically that would be the point where we went to a publisher. But instead we went to Kickstarter. We had the most extraordinary response, 15,000 people, and clearly the money was very important. But also now we have a relationship with 15,000 Broken Sword fans who will evangelize, and they're incredibly generous, incredibly passionate, and it's an absolute pleasure to be able to communicate directly with these people, which of course we couldn't have done if we were going through publishers, distributors and retailers.
Cette Malédiction du Serpent semble disposer d'une histoire complexe et intéressante, et propose en tout cas quelque chose de vraiment agréable d'un point de vue graphique. On remercie Charles Cécile pour ce quality time passé en sa compagnie et sa sympathie d'une manière générale. En revanche, on attendra évidemment de passer du temps sur ce nouveau Chevalier de Baphomet pour savoir ce qu'il vaut vraiment, et on vous invite à jeter un œil à la critique diffusée dans un 100% à venir.